Hello and welcome back to our third episode of Once Upon a Crime. This week we will be focusing on Asian Americans, specifically during the time of World War II.
In particular, about Asians, we're talking about Japanese Americans during World War II and how that affected them either in the military or just in their home base.
Yes. So prior to World War II, we saw anti-Japanese resentment with the Alien Land Act of 1913, which prohibited anyone not eligible for citizenship to own land. This restricted many Asian Americans, but specifically Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans, and this drove first-generation Asian immigrants into cities where they didn't have to own land. It restricted them from having jobs and forced them to be self-employed.
During World War II, Pearl Harbor, which is on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, they were surprisingly attacked on December 7th, 1941, during the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service that struck Pearl Harbor in Honolulu.
This sparked anti-Japanese sentiments through the roof. The distrust turned into fear, and the Japanese Americans in the mainland and in Hawaii were forced into internment camps.
Did you actually know that internment camps in Hawaii and the mainland were different?
How so?
So basically, since Hawaii was a majority all Asian population, so there were basically some people in internment camps and some people were not, because they were also in the medical field, tending to those in need. And what I was reading earlier is that if you were on the mainland and you were Japanese American, you were treated very horribly.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that.
In Hawaii, you barely got treated like crap. I would say it was more like civilized, because again, population in Hawaii is majority Asians.
Yes,
and
I think when you're a minority, you're like obviously more oppressed and treated worse.
And in Hawaii during that time, the FBI only arrested those leaders in the Japanese, German, and Korean communities. And I just found that very fascinating.
That is very fascinating.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, it's just crazy that minorities get treated differently in different places. I mean, it obviously makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially because of the Asian majority in Hawaii. But yeah.
How do you think I was so shocked?
I know,
shocked.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, I am from Hawaii and we are currently in Virginia for college here. And yeah, very culture shock in a way, but I wasn't surprised of it.
Yeah. So established during World War II under President Franklin D. Roosevelt through Executive Order 9066, signed on February 19th, 1942, internment camps were legalized and utilized throughout the country.
The theory was that Japanese Americans were spies for their homeland, Japan, and Japanese Americans could not be trusted. They were so distrusted, in fact, that they could be interned with just 1/8 Japanese ancestry. You know how hard that is? Yeah. What if you don't know? That's the issue. What if you didn't know that you're Japanese?
I think the thing is, this kind of made it so that non-Japanese Americans could be interned too, so it was kind of just like a race thing. You know, you see an Asian and you're like, yo,
damn,
you gotta prove that your great-grandparents were not Asian or you're going into an internment camp.
Learning about this in history in high school, there were actually people actually made patches saying that oh, I'm not Japanese, I'm Chinese.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, dang.
And that kind of I don't know how to say this, but it makes it makes the racism more palpable.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just white people or the majority coming at you, it's your sister minority coming at you as well.
And that was just very interesting to learn, because I'm just like, wow. Because isn't that what they did? Something very similar during World War II, but in
Germany?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Internment camps
and
concentration camps.
Yeah.
They're not the same, because it was less violent in America, but you know, you're still detaining people based on race.
And then for the concentration camps, they even put "I'm not Jewish."
Yeah.
And I was very shocked how those two correlated, and this was in the same time period as well.
Very sad.
Very, very sad.
Japanese Americans turned themselves in because of their culture of respect. This meant that there was little violence in the process, but there was still violence in the camps, and people still died there. We'll talk about 2 examples later. It impacted 125,000 Japanese Americans, which is just an insane number.
That's a lot.
Like,
And this was on the mainland. Correct?
on the mainland, yes.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
And the military created zones in California, Oregon, Washington, where there were a large population of Japanese Americans. And that was like really targeted against them. And like, I get it in their sense, but I'm just like, still like, they came to America for a better future, as they still get treated like crap because of the color of their skin or their appearance.
Yeah, their ethnicity. And we saw that about $400 million were lost in 1941 standards. And I believe that translates to over $1 billion in standards today.
That's how much it cost?
No, that's like how much was lost for the Japanese Americans. Like they lost land, they lost property, and all of their money was seized too.
Dang.
Yeah.
Damn. Did they ever get it back? They barely did.
They barely did. There were reparations in 1988. There was where they were granted $20,000 in tax-free reparations to the surviving 80,000 formerly interned Japanese Americans, and this was over a 10-year period, so I think it was more than 20,000, but it turned out to be $1.6 billion that was paid back to them, but still, like, it was overdue. It was 40 years after they were released, and they were still, like, impoverished when they got out.
That's horrible. It's basically the kids of the internment camp.
Yeah, like the kids at the internment camp got money, but like, what are you gonna do about the trauma that they had, or like all of the lost time they had, and the time that they had to make up all of the money that they lost?
And speaking of the military, at the end of March of 1942, all Japanese American men of the drafting age were designated as an IVC, also known as the enemy alien, and they were forced not to be allowed into the armed forces even though they were of age and they needed people for the war.
Yeah, this is all because they thought, again, that they were not trusted and that they were spies for their homeland, which is just...
It is. It's very sad.
Yeah.
Enemy alien.
Enemy alien. Imagine being classified as that.
That's horrible.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to talk about the violence in these internment camps. As I said before, there was not much violence going into it because there was little resistance and many Japanese Americans turned themselves in. But that doesn't mean that there was no violence in the camps themselves. So on July 27th, 1942, Toshio Kobata and Hirota Isumaru were shot and killed after a sentry claimed that they were attempting to flee. These 2 men were old in age, and they were doing a night march where prisoners were forced to march 2 miles to the camp from the train station that they came from. Japanese Americans testified that these men were old and disabled and struggling to march, and that they were killed without reason.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Like, it's one thing to be interred, but like there was no grace for anyone, and everyone was treated like garbage.
But in Asian heritage, you give so much respect for your elders, so much respect, and them just like, did they actually shoot them?
Yeah, they were shot and killed.
That's out of pocket, I swear. Out of pocket. That was somebody's grandparent. I mean, like, gosh,
Yeah, it was just a
gosh.
person too. Like, you don't have to have a relationship to deserve life. And like, I don't even know, like, it was just because they were struggling to march, like they were old and disabled. So this guy was like, "Oh, they're slow. They must be suspicious."
That's horrible.
Yeah.
And also, a month later, on August 4th, 1942, a riot broke out in California, Manzanares War Relocation Center. The riot happened due to the growing tension between the insufficient rations and overcrowding. To quell this, police tear gas crowds and used force to control the crowds. James Ito was killed instantly and many others were wounded. Jim Kanegawa, who died of complications 5 days later.
Yeah. And this is 2 deaths, but there were numerous injuries as well, which is just...
Tear gas is no joke.
No, yeah.
Tear gas
Like,
is no joke.
it can cause abortions for pregnant women as well.
I did not know that.
You didn't?
No.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So then there was Korematsu versus the United States. Korematsu went against internment camps and declined to just enter an internment camp. So basically, he argued that detained Japanese Americans violated the Fifth Amendment, the guarantee to fair trial, among other things. You know, they were just detained without a trial, without anything, just because of their race. You know, like you just see.
So they weren't arrested. They weren't.
No, well, I mean, there were arrests.
Oh.
You saw that.
Yeah.
But like, they didn't have a trial before they were just sent to the internment camps. They were just like straight, like arrested, go to the internment camp.
It's because of their color.
So the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the internment camps during World War II, and Korematsu lost the case, which is just devastating because it really was unfair to just...
It was unfair.
Yeah. It was all based on suspicion and nothing else.
That's so much trauma, getting arrested because your appearance.
Yeah.
Wow. That's horrible.
Pretty bad.
In 1945, following the Supreme Court decision, ex parte Mitsui Endo, in this case, justice ruled unanimously that the War Relocation Authority has no authority to subject citizens who are consideredly loyal to its leave procedures. The last internment camp, a high security camp in Lake Tool, California, closed on March 1946.
And then following this 40 years later, as we talked about, there was the reparations, but again, they did nothing impactful when they were needed, really, like 40 years later.
For real. That's just horrible. But on the other hand, did you ever heard of the 442 Regimental?
I'll be honest, I have not, until you talked to me about this earlier.
Okay, so since I grew up in Hawaii, this was mostly talked about in history, in our history classes in high school and intermediate. So the 442nd Infantry Regiment was during World War II. So this was second born generation Japanese Americans, which is called Nisei. And this unit was put together by President Roosevelt on February 1st, 1943. So Nisei came majority from Hawaii because out of the 18,000 men, 2/3 of them were from Hawaii, while the other third was from the mainland, but they were all Japanese Americans. Go for broke was their unit motto, and go for broke really means risk everything in all-out effort. Did the mainland Nisei and the Hawaii Nisei get along? The answer is no, they did not. Hawaii Nisei thought that the mainlanders were sullen and unfriendly. The mainlanders spoke formal and standard English, and the Hawaii-born Nisei spoke Pidgin. For those of you who don't know Pidgin is like a slang in Hawaii that if you were born and raised there, you understand the slang, but if you're not, it's it's very, it doesn't sound like English, but it's English words with different meanings. They spoke Pidgin, Hawaiian, Japanese, Portuguese, Chinese, and English. And when the 442 went into Arkansas, into the internment camps, the Nisei from Hawaii figured out why they were like very uptight. It's because they were treated like crap because they were not the majority, they're the minority. And people were crammed into houses. There was like literally no room. They were treated very harshly and very poorly. And they just finally understood, and with that they understood like, okay, I understand where you're coming from now. And with that, there was also another Japanese American battalion called the 100th Infantry Battalion. So the 442nd and the 100 Battalion, they actually fought together in Europe together. But with that, they of course faced many racism. But did you know that many of like the Japanese soldiers during that time, they did not speak about it after they got back from home?
Yeah, I did hear about that. It's like a source of shame, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It's a source of weakness, and like the whole thing about don't bring dishonor on your family.
Yes.
So it was mostly about like that. They felt that if they brought it up, it would cause shame to the family. So they just kept that bottled up inside of them.
And this kind of made it hard to get firsthand accounts of what the internment camps were like as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in recent history, like you kind of only get what the children of the people who were in internment camps went through, like their accounts, because they were like the ones who were crying it out of their parents, you know?
And like I found that horrible, but the 442nd is the most known as a decorated unit in U.S. military history for its size and for the length of service, but also all of the awards that they have gotten out of it. They have earned over 1,400 awards, 4,000 Purple Hearts, 4,000 bronze stars, 560 Silver Star medals, 21 medals of honors, and 7 presidential unit citations.
And I think that this is just like incredible because again, these were Japanese Americans who were looked down upon in American culture. So the fact that they were the most decorated battalion is like, it says a lot. It says a lot about what they did and how accomplished they were.
The 442 was not known just for their motto of go for broke, but also they're also known as the Purple Hearts unit, because they gotten so many. And I don't know, for me it's like, for me coming from Hawaii, it's just so much pride knowing that Asian Americans can make a difference in the US military or like abroad. And that's go for 442.
Go Asian Americans.
Yes, for real.
Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. We have been Once Upon a Crime.
See you next week.